Okay, boys, not long now until Season 1. Love it or hate it, it's coming. And I'm going to be participating in the race to 100 again as a solo hardcore player, just like in the preseason. And we did get our name on the statue last time, and we actually placed in like the top 300 or something, even though we died twice. But this time that won't be happening. We're going to get through it. 0 deaths, first character, easy. And if you don't want to miss that, there will be a link to my Twitch down in the description below. Come and join in. But yeah, let's get into the build. I'm going to go through the skill tree, the gear choice, and also the paragon, so absolutely everything. And I will be including a link to all of these that you can see on screen in the description down below. However, I am going to be also explaining an awful lot of important things throughout the video, so I do encourage you to at least watch this in combination with the guide. But yeah, let's jump into it, and we'll start with the skill tree of the sort of 1 to level 35 Barbarian. And this is our basic skill. We're going for Enhanced Lunging Strike, good mobility, good heal. We have Whirlwind, of course. Whirlwind is my build. And here is the first important thing you need to take notice of. Now, whether you're using a slashing weapon or a bludgeoning weapon is going to be really important to your choice here. If you're using a slashing, I'd recommend Furious Whirlwind. If you're using a bludgeoning, then I recommend Violent Whirlwind. As for which one should you use, well, it just depends on which one does the most damage. So, you know, this one does, say, 93. This one does 149. So I use the axe. And if you're wondering how you decide which one to use, if you press S and you hover over the skill, you can actually use your middle mouse button, press in, like your scroll wheel. If you press it in, you can choose manually, or you can just use it on auto select, and it will actually pick the highest DPS one for you. So every time you change weapon, you may want to take note of, like, just hover over and go, okay, it's using the axe. So it's using the axe. I then know that I want to be using Furious because that is a slashing weapon. I shouldn't be using Violent, right? And this is the first thing you're going to want to keep a very close eye on. But it's only 1 point you have to change to switch between them, but it just makes the Whirlwind build a little bit more, you know, suitable for that weapon type. But that is the only thing you have to do. After that, we got some points into Endless Fury. Now, I only have these in here until I unlock Tactical Stomp and Tactical Rallying Cry. Almost couldn't say it then. And then after that, I'll take these points out, and then we'll put them in to Swiftness, which is something I highly recommend having. Now, this is a honestly, it's a really powerful stat. Movement speed is very severely underrated, I think, by a lot of people. You definitely want to take this, trust me. We then go into Pit Fighter. We have Fighter's Death Blow, 3 into Thick Skin, and 3 into Counter Offensive. Now, a quick note here. You definitely want the 3 in Thick Skin because, it's a bit of a squishier season, so all of the help we can get there is going to really be quite valuable. But if you are feeling very tanky, if you're feeling like a bit aggressive, a bit risky, you can go for Counter Offensive for extra damage. However, if you're feeling squishy, if you want to play it safe, go for Defensive Stance instead. After that, we got our ultimate here, Call of the Ancients. This is going to be our primary boss killing, like, DPS. Now, this is, Fighter's Blow got buffed, so it's going to help quite a bit. But this really is where our boss DPS is. So this is going to be important for the early game while we're doing a lot of dungeons. Now, many of you may be surprised to see me go Unbridled Rage here. However, I've just found it to be the better of the key passives, even this early on. Like, yeah, you're going to run out of Fury very quickly, but you will do a lot of damage in that short time that you're spinning. So as long as you're kind of like, get into the momentum of using your basic attacks, stomping, using your shouts, you'll get there. Like, it will be kind of rough, but you will get there. You'll get through, and you'll get to the mid-game build eventually. But that's how I prefer to run it, and it's worked really well for me so far. Anyways, let's go into the gear now. Not going to be a lot to say here. You're going to be lucky to even get to, like, choose any of your gear. So, but I will give you some recommendations. If you happen to unlock these aspects, of course, you won't start with them, but as you do some dungeons, you will unlock some of these along your way. You can then start to put them in on these slots. And I would only recommend doing this if you have a very good piece of gear in this slot. And I have the stat recommendations down here. So if you have a piece that has like 3 of these on it, then maybe it is worth doing. As for upgrading, I wouldn't. I really wouldn't upgrade at this stage of the game at all, so don't do that. You'll have very few resources to do so. So, yeah, avoid that. As for gem selection, I would say if you have a slashing weapon, amethysts are definitely the go-to option. However, if you're using a mace, you're not making use of damage over time. So I would probably then encourage you to go for perhaps diamonds for extra Call of the Ancients damage, or skulls for some HP sustain. But you'll be very lucky, again, to find any gem sockets, so I wouldn't worry too much about this. The Malignant Hearts I'm going to talk about at the end of the video, because I've just kind of put the same 3 in every build. I'm not 100% sure on how quickly we're going to get these, when we're going to get these, and all that kind of stuff just yet. So these are just in here for fun, but we will talk about these at the end of the build guide. So stay around for that if you want to hear about those things. Here are our skills. One thing that I would just give you a recommendation on as far as a rotation goes, always cast Rallying Cry before Ground Stomp. That way you make use of the bonus resource gen. So don't screw that up if you want the best out of your abilities. Now, technique is going to be an interesting one. You can do a number of interesting things here. You can choose to use mace mace technique. Expertise, you want to try and actually level as many of these up as you can, which luckily with the way we're going to be kind of constantly switching between things shouldn't be too hard. But we're probably going to use the technique for two-handed mace to give us the lucky hit chance of gaining 2 fury. So this is going to help with a sustain of our whirlwind. Not a lot, but it'll do something occasionally. However, if you prefer just to apply a bleed and have some extra damage, you can use the two-handed sword technique. Now, if you use the two-handed sword technique with the mace, you can choose to then use amethysts, because of course you're now applying a bleed. Really, there's a lot of flexing around that you can do here. There is probably no perfect answer for this one. You just kind of choose the best that suits the situation your character's gear is in. But for now, I'm just recommending the two-handed mace one because it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. Maybe you're going to use skulls in that case, and you're going to use whatever weapon is most powerful for you. Again, as for stat recommendations, really this is not going to be applicable this early on, but it is here just in case you do find some good pieces. But I really wouldn't worry too much about this. If armor has got more armor than your previous armor, then equip the new armor. Same for weapons. If you have more DPS on it, then just equip it. Maybe not so much for the 2 one-handers. Maybe if you get some core skill damage, some strength on those, you can keep them around for a little bit. Again, the stat prioritization is here. So if you find something with strength, core, and damage to close, yeah, you could probably keep that for a little while. Maybe put an enchant on it. But again, don't worry too much until you move on to the next version of the build, which is the mid-game. The mid-game for me is 35 to 55, somewhere in that region, kind of the end of World Tier 1 and 2 and somewhat into World Tier 3. And we're going to start by looking at the skill tree again, because a little bit has changed here. So we have Combat Lunging Strike now, because I do expect that we would have maybe 15-20% crit chance at this stage. And it's a nice little damage and speed boost every time it goes off. Same applies for Whirlwind, depending on which weapon you're using. You want to alternate between Violent and Furious. Violent and Furious. Depends, right? You just have to keep an eye on that as you're leveling. We've maxed out Tactical Rallying Cry. We now have Tactical Challenging Shout as well as Mighty War Cry. So this here is a defensive with some extra resource gen. This here gives us berserking, some damage, and also some extra fortify. So we are going the 3 shout route still, because this early in the game, the cooldown reduction hit really isn't affecting us just yet, because we've not even got access to that much. But I still find this to be the smoothest version of Whirlwind. We have absolutely giga buffed the shouts here with all of these passives for extra defensives. We have the movement speed, of course, more resource gen through Prolific Fury. And again, same situation down here, Pit Fighter. And then we have all of this Fortify stuff here to give us more damage, more Fortify, and more tankiness. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not using Hamstring and No Mercy, well, Hamstring got nerfed into the ground. We no longer apply a slow permanently. It's just to enemies above 85% HP. And then, No Mercy required us to have enemies crowd controlled. So it was by extension, a pretty big nerf to No Mercy. So I'm going to be leveling without it for now. After that, we do have 3 points into heavy-handed, as we now should have enough access to crit to make good use of this. And then finally, we have got Wrath of the Berserker as our ultimate, which is, it's the best choice in the end game, and we should be doing more than enough damage to kill targets like bosses without the use of Call of the Ancients. Finally, Unbridled Rage, that hasn't changed. However, I don't know why this won't go away. There we go. So we have all of our aspects here listed out. Again, I don't really expect you to have access to this many, this early on, in all fairness. However, if you do happen to get these, this is where, you know, I'd recommend them. These are the ones that I would recommend. And if you do not have one here, then just refer back to the previous build and see what the alternative here is, because these are all from the Codex of Power. And actually all but 2 of these are from the Codex of Power. So you should have access to most of them. However, if you don't have the ones Bold Chieftain or Conceited, then just refer back to the previous build and take the alternative there. As for gems, now this again, we have to talk about this. If you take green gems, you absolutely have to take in your Paragon board Exploit first. So we're going to be looking at pure damage here. Exploit plus vulnerable damage. It's going to be a big DPS boost, but you know, you could always have tankiness stuff instead, which this season is kind of looking like what you might want to do, because they've taken a lot away from most classes. So it's a bit risky, but you can do that. However, if you're using a slashing weapon, again, you can use amethysts because it increases your bleed damage. If you're using the mace, it really gets a bit tough here. You can choose, if you're using the mace, you can choose to go for emerald to put in exploit, or you can choose to continue using skulls for some life on kill, so you get some sort of feedback from that. It's a bit tough. This is a really awkward position for barbarians at the moment, and just really not sure what the best solution is until we go through it a little bit later today. So if anything changes, I will update this page so you can see what the recommendation is. Obviously, I can't come back and finish this video, but or, you know, edit the video after it's been uploaded. But I will change it if anything changes. So I'm pretty confident that this will probably just be the best for now. Now, I do also recommend having rubies in the gear. You could choose, if you want, to have instead sapphires. I think both are a very good option. I saw some really interesting videos on damage reduction calculations, and I think they fall within a very small margin of one another, so it really doesn't matter. You can go for either or, but I find health is just a little bit better because you don't have to you have to generate fortify in order for it to be effective, right? And we have a lot in this gear. However, I'd rather play the more consistent damage reduction, and we'll look at fortify again later and maybe change it if we need to. But yeah, reds for now. Technique, same as before. If you know, by default you can use the mace. However, if you're feeling you'd prefer to have the extra damage, then you can go into the sword. And if you're using the sword, of course, then amethysts become an option again. Lots of switching and swapping around, you can see, but this is really how to get the most out of the barbarian. And yeah, it's actually kind of part of the fun with the class, because it's very by comparison to other classes, I feel like very in-depth gearing, so you can really min-max yourself pretty much every time you get a new weapon, and it's a lot of fun. I actually enjoy doing this, and you can get some significant power boosts from having everything lined up the right way. But yeah, moving into stat prioritization. Again, most of this is going to be very similar to builds in the past. However, there are a few key changes I want to make note of. First of all, maximum life is a far higher priority than I would have said it was before. It's one of the few defensives that didn't get nerfed. So you can go for this on pretty much like your pants, your helm, and your chest, and I think it'll be a very, very good, solid pick. As for damage reduction, again, it's just one of those things. Try and get as much as you can. Yes, they have been nerfed. However, they are still definitely the stats you want to be going for. Everything else, pretty much the same. We still are going to be socketing cooldown reduction everywhere we can. Probably still the most important most important modifier in the game. Boots, all the same. Again, weapons, we're basically, you know, throughout the whole game, we're actually avoiding like damage to slowed and damage to crowd control because it's no longer any good for us. So yes, you'll see all of these changes here. Just refer back to this if you ever get confused, because it's all written in there for you. All right, my camera froze there, so I got to go again. But yeah, as for the Paragon board, I like to go for every node that's of use to me before moving on. Like I said, Martial by default, but Exploit if you really are not feeling too like in danger of dying. And then once I have enough points to get to the next glyph, I'll count them up, be like 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, count up to the next glyph and all the nodes that I need to unlock it. I will then move these points away from here and then move them to the next board. But I will show you the full board in the next build. We are ready to move over now to the end game. And the end game is basically World Tier 4 Plus. And this here is the skill tree. So there's not too much that's changed, but there are a few things here. So first of all, we have moved some points into Pressure Point, and we got these from removing most of the points from Rally and Cry. We took away Tactical and Enhanced, and we also took away Mighty Cry. Now, we are really only using the base effect of these shouts because they're, first of all, very powerful, but secondly, because we only really need to activate Echoing Fury from them, especially while we're leveling. You know, we don't need to min-max with things like, you know, all of these extra nodes here. They just, actually, for the most part, they really don't do all that much. We have fully giga-buffed passives here for the shouts as well. Again, so that's something I like to do. Now, you could probably put, you know, these points in here. It'd be... I mean, it's a little bit more consistent here, but it's a little bit more powerful here. It just depends on your preference. For me, I like this because typically I'm using my shouts into the groups of enemies themselves, whereas this is passive damage reduction. This is a damage reduction put on the enemy, so you have to like use this on the enemies you want the damage reduction from, whereas this you can have like coming into the fight. So yeah, it's one of those things. Like, the reason I like this is because, again, you can use it with any shout. So if your shouts go out of cooldown, you can pop any of them, and this one will cause the enemies to deal less damage. So it kind of, you know, pros and cons, right? Pros and cons. Moving on then, we have Swiftness, of course, Prolific Fury. None of this has changed. Actually, we took a point out of defensive stance. And that would have been to go into Wallop and Concussion. So this is a mace build. At this stage of the game, I definitely recommend trying to move into a two-handed mace version of the build. And if you are stuck using a sword, if you've not found a good mace, then what I would do is I would remove these 6 points for now, and I would put them into some defensive measures. Maybe some extra points into Challenging Shout, extra points into Imposing Presence, Martial Figure, stuff like that. Right? That'll be fine. Or if you're having Fury issues still, pop it into Rally and Cry, and yeah, you'll be good to go. However, I would recommend a mace if you can. Wrath of the Berserker, Unbridled Rage, nothing has changed there. Gear, pretty much the same aspects as before. Recommended, though at this point I do expect that you'd be at least onto most of them. Maybe you're still looking for a Bold Chieftains, but fingers crossed that's not the case. We have Emeralds because we do have Exploit in the board. Again, Rubies and some experimentation with Sapphires is fine. But again, like, according to a lot of people, the damage reduction amounts pretty much pan out to be more or less the same. So don't sweat it too much. Just use what you're most comfortable with. We'll talk about these in just a second again. Axe Technique at this point in the game. Again, once you have access to Exploit, you'll want to go two-handed. Axe Expertise is a very big DPS boost. And the same stat priorities as before. Again, higher emphasis on max HP. And, you know, even though Vulnerable and crit damage still got nerfed, I really don't think there's going to be anything that's going to be, beating them at the moment, because they are multiplicative, which means they just have very, very high value. Now, core and close damage are interchangeable, really. You don't necessarily have to have core, but I've put it on all of these, it seems. But you could absolutely have close instead. As for the all-stat versus strength argument, it really just depends on your Paragon board. How much, all-stat do you have on your boots? Maybe you have some all-stat on your helmet, so you can go more strength, because you are going to need to unlock quite a few rare nodes. Some of these nodes require 450 dex, so it's up to 600 dex, I think, 520 dex, 610 willpower, and I was actually able to unlock all of these on my Barbarian. So again, it's a balance about figuring out what you need, looking at your rare nodes, deciding whether or not they are worth getting. Like, is 5% damage reduction while healthy worth having? Hell yeah, dude. That's really worth having. So getting that extra like 100 dexterity on your gear, it's going to be a really, really big help, because it will unlock this extra damage reduction. So pay close attention to that. Make sure you are making good use of these valuable nodes. And then moving on, we'll have a quick look at the board. Now, this is actually the exact same build that I've been using in the past on the Paragon. So nothing has really changed here, but I'll just quickly go through some of the things I'm keeping my eye on as I level up. So we have Territorial here. We have Exploit here. Now, because I'm going 3 points into Thick Skin, I'm not 100% sure if I need Warbringer. And it does say Warbringer. It doesn't say Warbinger. This says Warbringer. I don't know if it's a spelling mistake on the website, but there's been a whole hoopla about this being Warbinger or Warbringer, but it says Warbringer now. And I'm kind of concerned that I might not need this anymore, so this could be wasted points that you can put somewhere else. But testing is what we're going to do tomorrow, and once we get to this point, we will figure it out very quickly. Hunter Killer into Martial. Going down here, we've got Imbiber. Now, As always, I've said this on many videos, so forgive me for repeating myself. Imbiber, you probably don't want to have this early on. Instead, you'd want Disembowel down here. The reason they're switched around is because Disembowel and Imbiber, they're both willpower nodes, but there's more willpower, I think, on this one than there is on this one. So you want this one down here. Oh, sorry, it's the other way around. There's more willpower down here, and you want this one down here so you get the extra healthy damage. So that's the reason why they're like this. But until the late game, I would have Disembowel first, because we still do use Berserk Ripping for leveling, because it allows us to get access to that cooldown reduction, which is going to be pretty valuable because cooldown reduction is now more scarce than it has been in the past. But moving on, we have Wrath here. Another thing that you can do, if you feel the need to, is actually move the Wrath board like to here or something. You can move it, or you move it here. Get the Fury on crit earlier. However, I find by the time I get here with all the Fury on kill and, you know, the cooldown reduction and the shouts and everything, I'm usually pretty good at this point. So I'm not too concerned about getting that too early. But you can move that around if you want. And then finally, of course, like I said, we have a final willpower node here, which is Disembowel at the moment, but usually Disembowel would be there, and then swap here afterwards. And that's it. That's the Paragon board. That is the skill tree. That is the gear. Now, like I promised, I'm going to very quickly talk about the Malignant hearts that I'm most excited about trying. So first is the Malignant pack. This is the one that gives you a cycling bonus. So every 20 kills, you'll either have 20 attack speed. Then if you get 20 kills, it'll move on to a 15% chance to get a full restore of your resources. And then after that, it's a barrier. Now, this just sounds really exciting. It just gives you a lot of very powerful bonuses. And it seems like it could be particularly strong on bosses, because you could preemptively proc the one that you want, then go fight the boss, because you know you won't be killing 20 enemies in there, so you'll just stick on the bonus that you already have. I have the Barber here, which sounds really fun. Now, I'm not too sure how it works, and I cannot wait to test it, but all subsequent attacks after a crit for 2 to 4 seconds will be absorbed by the target. Now, by absorbed, I hope that doesn't mean like the enemy becomes immune to my damage, but who knows? And then the absorbed damage will explode after that time, causing damage to all nearby enemies, and also the damage is increased by 10% per second that it's on the enemy. However, I am very interested to know, does this just detonate if I kill the enemy? Say, for example, I'm spinning, I go into a group of enemies, I start killing them all. Does accumulated damage from, like, crits within that time period still explode if they die, like, in that window? Because you could see some pretty interesting chain reaction explosions, which could be extremely fun. So I'm excited to see how this works. Might not work like that, but we will find out very shortly. And then we have Tempting Fate, which for a Whirlwind Barbarian just seems ridiculous. So we get between 40 and 60% crit damage, but our non-crits deal less damage. And because of things like Dire Whirlwind, we have ridiculous amounts of crit. Like a Barbarian, even without No Mercy, because of the hamstring nerf, can probably get very close to 100% crit. So we will be making extremely good use of something like Tempting Fate. Now, there are a few other interesting ones in here. They're like defensives that give you immunities. We have things that give us like explosive damage after we absorb a certain amount of damage ourselves and use a defensive, which I really want to try. I think that one was called Retaliation. I just have to find it here, because it sounds like, I mean, it sounds potentially very strong. But essentially, it says suppress 10 to 20% of the damage that we take. And then when we use a defensive, that damage is then multiplied by 2.5 and then done as an AoE in damage. I cannot for the life of me find it. This is not the best presentation for them. But it is in here somewhere. You can you can trust me. I did read it. And the reason I think that might be very good is because our shouts are actually defensives. So we can proc it repeatedly by using our shouts. But time will tell. It's all speculative at the moment. Time will tell. There will be a video updating you guys about that. But yeah, if you want to catch it live, it will be, we will be actively racing and testing things tomorrow or tomorrow. And you can catch that via the link down in the description below. But as always, if you found it useful, don't forget to give it a like, consider subscribing. Catch you on the next one. Peace.